Hello, welcome to Geeks Anonymous. This is an initial impressions review of the new Fantasy Flight Games big box game. It's Star Wars Armada. Now this is an initial impressions review because we've only played 2 games of this. Okay, we've just gone through the sort of learning starter scenario plus 1 more game. So I'm going to go through the components and put them together, how that felt. Talk about the gameplay and look at some of the things we really liked and maybe some of the things that initially don't seem quite so good. Now, first of all, this is the big brother to X-Wing, is what it feels like. Whereas X-Wing is looking at that sort of dogfighting style scale, this is big scale. This is big fleet combats. Now, components wise, once we got it all out and got it all out on the table, it took probably around about a good hour to put all the bits and pieces together, and they're really great. Okay, these are really good components. So the stands themselves are very sturdy, as you kind of want them to be. With I mean, this is probably sort of 30-35 pounds worth just by itself, I'd imagine. And these really nice heavy duty stands to sort of look after these sort of models. We've got these inlay cards on them which have quite a bit of information on there, which saved you from going back to your unit cards all the time to check the information, so that was really good. It's got the dials on there for the for keeping track of the shields, and everything went together very nice and easily. It was all very smooth. It's just a normal sort of great quality, I suppose, that we've come to expect from FFG components. The models themselves are they come pre-painted. The capital ships do, not the smaller ones, but that's fine because they're kind of in the colours you'd expect them to be anyway. In the plastic they've been moulded in, but this has got a nice bit of detailing on. They've put, you know, they've painted the exhaust ports and things like that. So I mean, they do actually really look quite nice on the tabletop there. So it comes with these 3 capital ship ones. The big Star Destroyer, and then the Nebulon B frigate and the Corellian Corvette for the Rebels, plus there's a bunch of X-Wing and TIE Fighter squadrons as well. The bases on these squadrons are really quite good, certainly nice and sturdy and held them in place. The only possible thing is that these are attached by quite small little pegs, which isn't so good in the sense that they could be snapped fairly easily, especially if you've got little children around. But the way this one is attached was by quite a large attachment, and so I think the Star Destroyer should be fine. Okay, other bits and pieces then. The cards. So there's a few cards that comes with the game. And these are good. These are really nice. So they give you a couple of units, and then there's some reference cards, and then there's also a bunch of objective cards. I think 12 for kind of putting scenarios in for your game, which are really good. This is your movement widget thing, and I like this. This is pretty good. Now, in the demo ones, if you've watched like the Gen Con demos and things like that, it looked like it was partly card and partly plastic. When we've actually got these, they're all plastic, and I think that's a lot better. This feels a lot sturdier than if it had been made with some cardboard as well. In the game, it works fine. It does exactly what it's meant to do. I'll talk a little bit more about the actual movement once we go a little bit further into this. Now, overall then, these are nice components. Really enjoyed them. Nice putting them together. They're nice playing with them now, and yeah, they've done a really good job with the components in this. Okay, so after that, then we set it all up and we came to actually play the game. Now, learning to play using this booklet was definitely the biggest pain point of our initial experience with this. This is poorly written. Really not up to FFG's normally really great standards. We were sort of it tells you what units to use in the first game, and I was sort of expecting a walkthrough. It doesn't really do that, it just tells you roughly the rules in each of the phases and kind of then expects you to get on with it. Now that would be fine if it was really clearly written, but again it's not really very clearly written. So I mean, I played it with someone who played a lot of X-Wing as well, and whilst there may be some similar concepts, there was still a lot of head scratching going on with this because it wasn't really it was a little ambiguous in some of the wording on this. So that was a bit of a shame really. We ended up going back and forth between the Learn to Play booklet and the actual rules reference guide. And sometimes it felt like they weren't quite filling each other in, and it got a little bit confusing. However, we played through that first game and it probably took about an hour and a half. But definitely the rule set could have been written a lot better. Okay, so what was the gameplay itself like? Well, overall, we had a lot of fun. It's good, it's very good. Now, the big thing about it is it feels like it's big space battles. It is very thematic. The movement is really cool. The way that the ships end up sort of having the feel of the drift and the float, which they would do in space. This movement tool really manages to capture that very well. So for instance, this big Star Destroyer is not really going to move very fast, very far, very quickly, whereas in our games we were playing, these smaller, faster frigates really were managing to very cleverly outmaneuver. Maybe that's partly because of my opponent Ricky, but were very able to outmaneuver the big, slow, heavy, ponderous Star Destroyer and start getting in around the sides and even in around the rear of the ship, where of course it's got less shields. So excuse me. So the movement worked really very, very well. It felt like you had two small fast ships that were flanking round a great big heavy slow ponderous ship. In actual playing the game, and you put it all together, it all just felt very cool. Clicking shields down, you know, rolling the dice, working out your movement, the command dials, which I'll talk about now, it all fitted together really nicely. So these command dials then, this is a really interesting little addition. There's 4 icons on there. You can have a read of what they all are. But essentially what happens with this is you get to pick a special command that's going to give your ship some sort of bonus for that turn if you choose to use it that round. But what was very clever is you don't have to use it that round. You can actually exchange it for a token, which then stays with your ship for the rest of the game, and you can use that token in a future turn. So for instance, you could in the first turn choose a repair. Well look, you're not going to need repair in the first turn unless something's gone very horribly wrong. So what you actually do is you're not really going to use necessarily anything with the command dial in the first turn, so rather than it being a wasted turn, you get to store one of these markers for a future turn. So the repair phase, perhaps the repair token that you took in the first turn, perhaps you could use, say, in the 4th turn or the 5th turn. Maybe when you've actually also done a repair on your command dial for that turn, and so you actually end up having one turn where you would have a sort of a super repair going on, all because you'd sort of strategically held it over from earlier on in the game. That worked really well. It was very, very cool, and something that felt like you could do, especially with the Imperial side, because it's a bigger, slower ship. You actually get 3 of these, and you have to prepare a little bit because you're working out for 3 turns in advance. This one just has 2, so my opponent only had to organise 1 turn in advance what he wanted his command special icon to be, and for this one it's just that turn. So this is able to respond very, very quickly and have the command dial that you want available for that turn. But that was really good fun, it felt like you were dealing with some sort of battlefield logistics, but really cool that you could keep it back and then have a turn where you'd have maybe 2 or 3 tokens going off at once. So the command dials were really great. We really liked those. They added quite a little bit to it. Each of the ships also as well gets defense tokens. Now these were very, very thematic and cool. Essentially what they are is special abilities as well that you can that have a limited use on your turns. So for instance, this has got 2 evade tokens, and what that means is that if you get hits at long range, it can actually cancel out the dice with those hits on. Now that actually became very, very fluffy in our game, because my opponent was using these smaller, faster ships to sort of skirt around and stay at longer range, and so whilst I was able to get some hits on him at long range, he was able to be using his evade ability to sort of dodge the shots, which felt really, really cool as this you know, fast, relatively speaking, fast, agile ship was managing to just dodge out out of the way of my shots. It felt very cool. It felt very thematic, and that's actually something that you get throughout the whole of the game. So many of the little rules that they've built into this, they really feel very fluffy. So not only are they really good mechanics, they really fit with the theme and the Star Wars feel of the game. Now then, different coloured dice. So it's got these different coloured dice, and these related to the different ranges that you were able to shoot at. And again, this was very clever and worked very well. So for instance, my Star Destroyer, if you were shooting in the frontal arc, it could roll 3 red and 3 blue. Now, the blue dice are medium range dice. So if you were shooting a ship that was in your long range, then you wouldn't get the blue dice, you'd just get the 3 red dice. And if you were really close, then there is actually a black for the close range, which has got more tokens on, and it's easier to get more hits with the darker coloured dice. They worked really well. Like I said, they comboed really nicely with the different abilities that were on the ships. So for instance, the squadrons, one of them, so Luke Skywalker is actually represented as a squadron, and he just has some great abilities. For instance, when Luke attacks a capital ship, you take it that there are no shields there. Okay, so just little things like that that really help to make it feel like, yeah, I've got an ace starfighter pilot here that's able to get under the shields or to find those specific points to fire his photon torpedoes at. It had that sort of feel. Very cool. And I think if I had to say one of the big things about the gameplay is that it was this great big space battle thematic feel that really shone through the most for me. Now, we're actually playing with a small number of forces here. You don't get a great deal in this box. I think the RRP is probably about right, but when you actually compare it with lots of other games, so for instance, I'm thinking, say, Twilight Imperium, and the amount of stuff that you get in a box like that, it just felt a little bit, it feels you get a bit more in that than you do in this. But these are really, really nice models. Yes, it's the thematic theme and flavour that really makes this feel great. So once we played our second game and we were able to use the upgrades, we found that that again just added that little bit extra to it. I was able to beef up my Star Destroyer even more, and there was one point in our second game where my opponent Rick decided he was going to use a sort of hit and run style attack with his Corellian Corvette, which had General Dodonna on, and it had a really cool special rule that he brought into play, and he felt like he might be able to man it with a one turn of firing from the Star Destroyer. Unfortunately, I had added some upgrades and you know, turbo laser battery upgrade or something like that, and I managed to destroy his ship in one huge fusillade of fire. That was really, it felt very thematic. I was pulling in shields and turning it into extra dice to shoot at, and, you know, drawing all the sort of defensive energy and putting it into the lasers, and it blew up his Corellian Corvette. and it was a really cool moment. But in that game, Rick managed to destroy almost all, well, he destroyed all of my squadrons of fighters early on, and so the end of the game ended up with a bunch of X-Wings swarming my Star Destroyer, the Nebulon B frigate keeping a nice range and managing to stay into the rear arc of my Star Destroyer, and it was only time that saved me in the end. So next what I'll do is, lots of stuff I loved about this game, but next I'll go and just talk a little bit about some of the cons, if you like. Okay, so some of the cons, if you like, the things that we perhaps maybe didn't enjoy quite so much during the first couple of games of this. So I've mentioned the value. Perhaps it didn't feel quite that you get as much as things like Twilight Imperium and so on. Nice models, yes, but at this price point you'd probably want just a little bit more than there is in here. And I think more is probably the big thing that I would say here. So the upgrades that you get for the ships, there's a few in there, but there's not all that many. It didn't feel like when we played our second game, which was we played to 180 points. I kind of took just about all the upgrades that I could take on my ships, and my opponent Ricky did the same with his rebel ships, and we were still coming in at under 180 points, which is a bit weird when it's the size of game that they suggest you play in the starter box. Another very, very annoying thing, although they've got these pilot or commander type cards in there, which are brilliant, they're really cool. You pay an upgrade and you get to have General Dodonna flying your Corellian Corvette, or Grand Moff Tarkin controlling the Star Destroyer, which I did in my game. But then Grand Moff Tarkin's ability refers to your other capital ships. There aren't any other capital ships for the Imperials in this starter box set. So I find it completely baffling that for the starter box they've given you a character that you can't use his ability and take advantage of it because you haven't got any other ships. I mean, all they had to do was just give you another 5 ships. No, obviously not. All they had to do was just come up with a different character or give him a different ability. I mean, that really seemed very, very strange to me, and more than a little annoying. So yeah, more upgrades and a better choice of commanders to put on the ships would have been much appreciated, FFG. Now, fiddliness. There were times it was getting a little bit fiddly. Now we were playing on a 3x3 board, 3 foot by 3 board, which is again what they recommend that you play. Certainly once you get to bigger games they say to go to 6x3, and this problem may be somewhat alleviated on a bigger board. But there were times, for instance, when you were trying to do your ship movement, so you'd be placing it on the board there, but of course you've got to place it on the board, and you'd be sometimes placing it, on top of ships and having to move them out of the way, and at times it just felt a little bit fiddly. I'm thinking if you want to use this for tournament play, it was kind of a little bit awkward with putting. Now they've got rules for when ships butt up against other ships, and they've got rules for where the squadrons will go around the ships and who moves them where and all that kind of stuff. So they have addressed it. They conceded it's a problem, but it's just a little bit annoying sometimes when you're trying to put your thing down and you've got to move everything out of the way just to be able to put the marker down properly. So that was a slight drawback that could get rather annoying if you've got lots and lots going on and it's really getting busy in the middle of the board. It also felt short. You play for 6 rounds, and the rounds passed very quickly, which is cool and good for tournament play, I guess. But what you want to do is make sure that it feels like it comes to a resolution. There's going to be a conclusion at the end of the 6 rounds. Now, admittedly, we weren't playing with the objective cards. They kind of recommend that you don't do so when you are playing through this starter box set. Certainly initial couple of games. And Yeah, both games didn't really feel like one side or the other had won. It still felt very much like a draw. Now, I think a large part of that problem is the fact that we're not really playing with many points here. I've had a Star Destroyer and then I had a bunch of squadrons. He killed off my TIE Fighter squadrons. I was still left with a Star Destroyer, which is worth a stupendous amount of points. I had killed off one of his ships, but he still had another capital ship and a bunch of X-wings left. So when you added it all up, it was still largely much of a muchness that was left on the board, even after 6 rounds of play. And it did feel very quick as well. I mean, the second game we had upgrades going on, and some extra rules came into place, and we completed the game still in about an hour. So it's really fast to play at this sort of size with the 180 points that we played to. So it does feel short. I'm sure some of you will say, well, that's great, but of course I'm sure if you're playing with 500 points or something, which you're going to be doing in the future when we've got lots of extra cool amazing things, and the wave expansions that are coming, they do look really great. I'm sure that's obviously going to bump up the overall length of the time in the rounds. So it's more of a problem, I think, with the box set, with there not being much in it. And I think that really, if you've got any real problems with this game, it's probably going to come down to that at this stage. This is a taster. It's not the game. This is just a couple of units in a game that's meant to be a big, sweeping, lots and lots of ships and stuff going on, loads of dice being rolled, movement everywhere. I think it's a lot of the criticisms that you might see coming over the next couple of weeks as people are cracking this open and playing it for the first time is due to the fact that there's really not all that much in the box. If you have played Warhammer, like tabletop miniatures, it kind of feels like playing a 200 point Warhammer game. I mean, it needs to be 2,000 points to get a proper match out of it. That's where the rule set's really designed for and where you're going to get the most out of it. However, overall, I can see this system is going to be really, really good fun. The fluff and the theme is fantastic. If you are a Star Wars fan, and why would you be watching this if you're not, you're going to love the fluff behind it. It feels like every mechanic that they've put into the game, it feeds the fluff. It makes you go, oh yes, that's just like in the films, or that's exactly how I'd imagine it to be, or oh, that's such a cool rule because it makes you think of blah de blah. There are many, many moments where myself and my opponent, we kind of looked at each other and went, oh, that's really cool. So overall, first impressions are really good rule set. Shame about how they've written the rule books. Components are really great. Shame we couldn't have a lot more of them. I think maybe 2 box sets. If you and a mate's going to get one as well, pull them together, and I think you'll probably get something that's a bit more closer to a good starter size, really. But it's good. Initial impressions are very, very promising, and with looking down the line at all the different wave expansions that are coming in and all the new ships that we've got coming in, I think I'm quietly confident that this is going to be something that hits the board a lot, and we get a lot of play out of it. So yeah, hope that just fills you in a little bit more and gives you an idea of whether this is maybe a game you want to add to your collection. Enjoy.